Hello, my dear contubernales. I think it is a perfect occasion to put on a green tunic, as today we are talking about cannabis in the ancient Roman world. Did Romans smoke recreationally? Did they know of cannabis' medical properties? Who were the stoners of the ancient era? All this and more in today's video. As it turns out, Romans used hemp on regular basis for robes, clothes, sails and many other textile-related applications. The fabric made from it was strong, durable and relatively easy to produce. Moreover, the more potent variant of the cannabis plant, richer in the psychoactive substance THC, found its uses in medicine, magic and recreational intoxication. Although its empire-wide use can be confirmed, not much scientific work was dedicated to it, because of a bias weighing the topic down. This bias is not so much caused by the modern wide illegality of the psychoactive variant of the plant, but rather by scholars' strong belief that ancients were advocates of moderation when it comes to use of mind-altering substances, as this way of life was strongly promoted by philosophers. Well, in my humble and uneducated opinion, if that was true, they wouldn't be drinking alcohol, would they? What was the reality of Roman use of cannabis? Let's learn a little and try figuring it out. Before we concentrate on the Romans, let's have a more general and brief look at human-cannabis relations and the plant's presence in cultures surrounding the Roman world. The archaeological record shows that humans did use cannabis over 12,000 years ago. Finds from the Neolithic caves from the Middle East and Hindu Kush mountains include cannabis seeds, ashes and resin. Throughout the ages via the Silk Road, its use spread to other cultures from China in the east to the Scythians, Thracians and Egyptians in the west. A Greek historian, Herodotus, describes that the tribes living north of Black and Caspian Seas used to throw cannabis flowers into a fire or onto hot coals and inhaling the fumes. Often for ritualistic purposes, these bonfires were placed inside tents to increase smoke's density and magnifying the magical, mind-altering effect, making them the biggest stoners of antiquity. Greeks and Romans found smoking uncivilized, as it was the barbaric tribes who consumed cannabis in this way. Worry not, they found their own way of consumption. Without engaging much further into this topic and analyzing further evidence, it can be already deduced that cannabis must have found its way into the Roman world, as it was present in all neighboring cultures. In order to understand cannabis's place within the Roman world, one first needs to grasp ancient comprehension of medicine, botany, and human health. The ancients from around the Mediterranean possessed great expertise in pharmacology. Since the time of first Greek philosophers, knowledge about natural world and plants was written down. Properties of a great amount of these were well studied and their effects were continuously tested. Some were known to have medical use, some to be mind-altering, some to be stimulating. In consequence, Romans, who further expanded on the work of their Greek counterparts, could produce finest oil-based perfumes, develop great color palette for their dyes and paints, and make often effective medication. Actually so effective that few treatments already used by the ancients are still applied in modern medicine. The Greek and Roman way of thinking was simple, yet resultful. Dosis sola facit venenum. The dose makes the poison. All of the aforementioned knowledge was grounded within the so-called humoral system, which was key for ancients to understanding health and medicine. It was first taught by Hippocrates and dictated that all diseases were caused by an imbalance between four humors present in a body. The humors had qualities assigned to them, which helped a doctor in choosing a proper treatment for a patient. Respectively, we have blood, which was considered to be hot and wet, yellow bile, which was considered to be hot and dry, black bile, which was considered to be cold and dry, and phlegm, which was considered to be cold and wet. Similarly, plants and foods, which were the ingredients in ancient remedies, were assigned their own qualities. Thus, if a patient suffered from an illness that made him feel cold and sweaty, he was given a medicine with opposing qualities in order to mitigate the symptoms. Substances with the same qualities were often mixed together, doubling the medication's strength. For example, mixing together garlic and black pepper, which were both considered to be hot, was believed to create a more effective cure for cold injuries and illnesses. Surprisingly, this often led to the development of truly efficient cures, but also fateful treatments, such as bloodletting. Hippocratic humoral ideas were passed down the generations and developed upon by people like Aristotle and his student Theopratus, whose life's work was codification of plants, animals, and human physiology in the 9 volumes of writing. In the Roman Empire, naturalists and doctors took over the Greek ideas and further developed ancient medicine, basing their understanding on the humoral system. These were figures such as Dioscorides, Nero's doctor, Pliny the Elder, a friend of Vespasian, and Galen, who treated 5 emperors: Marcus Aurelius, Lucius Verus, Commodus, Septimius Severus, and Caracalla. Although it is proven that Greeks were well aware about cannabis, it doesn't seem that they used it for any medicinal treatments. First mention of cannabis in ancient medicine comes from scholars writing under the Roman Empire. These are Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides, who, with the humoral system perspective, assigned cannabis with drying and warming properties. According to them, cannabis had few main applications in medicine. 1. Cannabis in a liquid form casted out earworms, removed blockage, and eased ear pain. This seems to have been the most common use of cannabis in ancient medicine. Almost every scholar following Pliny the Elder mentions it. 2. Cannabis uncooked and made into plaster was applied to burns and wounds. Similar treatments are used today, as a compound CBD found in cannabis has anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving properties. 3. Cannabis cooked was applied on contracted joints and gout. Just like in the previous point, cannabis, thanks to its properties, is still used today to treat gout. It alleviates pain, reduces swelling and inflammation, simultaneously causing less side effects than many modern drugs do. When dealing with cannabis, the ancients naturally came across the feeling of a high caused by the THC. This side effect was referred to as a dry feeling in the head or a headache, was well understood and seen as nothing discouraging the use of plant as medication. The high was simply mentioned in their medicinal texts in order for the doctors and patients to be aware of the side effects that will occur. The next big source for cannabis in ancient medicine is Galen, but before him there is one more mention of cannabis in Archigenesis's work, who lived under the rule of Trajan. He mentioned it as an ingredient in a recipe for treating intestinal worms. Quote, "A drink of woodworm, black cumin and cannabis, the seed of mulberry and its root. Boil softly with equal amount water, mix with wine and give to the patient to drink." The treatment could have been effective, as cannabis also has anti-parasite properties. On the other note, woodworm, which is also found in the recipe, is also psychoactive and still added to alcohol today for stronger effect. However, you most likely know it under the name absinthe. Our next big source, Galen, mostly repeats the medical uses of cannabis, which makes it look like it is common knowledge by his time. Galen did, however, know about one more use, or maybe he even discovered it himself. In one of his works, he mentions that cannabis eases the muscles of the limbs. This work is unfortunately lost to us. Knowledge about it only survives thanks to it being mentioned by Al-Kindi, a Syrian doctor from the 9th century. All future ancient and early medieval scholars only replicated all this knowledge, some even copying entries about cannabis word to word. And now for what I believe to be by many the most anticipated part: the use of cannabis in Roman religion and recreation. As with all things Roman, let's start with the Greeks. their textual mentions refer again to the other tribes, mostly Scythians and Thracians, using cannabis for ritualistic uses. In their religion, it mostly served a purpose of curing grief and communicating with the dead. The only definitive use of cannabis in Greek religion comes from archaeological records. The plant's residue was found at a dig site of an ancient oracle near Epirus. Something different can be said about recreational use, which is more often referred to in the sources. Recreational use was compared to the well-known by the Greeks feeling of drunkenness. Barbarians were also mentioned to enjoy cannabis recreationally. As described, its consumption made the barbarians joyful, laugh more and dance. That's why cannabis was also referred to as a laughing weed. With such a renown, it won't surprise you to learn that cannabis seems to have been a common guest at Greek and Roman symposium, an event centered around intoxication. Greco-Roman culture tended to criticize over-intoxication. This is why the symposium was designed differently, in order to slowly introduce the feeling of intoxication and make it last throughout the night. A symposium thus began with tasting of unmixed wine, which due to ancient fermentation technology usually reached about 8% ABV. This wine was then watered down for later consumption, becoming mixed wine. Both Aristotle and Plutarch write about the unmixed wine being often spiced up with drugs. For example, the organizer of a symposium was expected to warn his guests if he put henbane into the wine, so they wouldn't hallucinate too hard and lose their mind. My guess is that ancient authors also wrote it in order to minimize OD situations, as with henbane and such, too large of a dose can even result in death. In the same text, the organizer of a symposium is also encouraged to add into the unmixed wine a mythical substance, nepenthe, also known as a drug of forgetfulness. It is not impossible that cannabis was one of the ingredients in that drug, as at least to the Romans it was known to release its users from anxiety. A definitive proof of cannabis appearing at a symposium would be a mention of cannabis cakes as among different desserts served at such events. Something that we would call today an edible. Unfortunately, no recipes survived. The plant is also mentioned in ancient poetry, which was often recited at symposium, suggesting that the audience was accustomed with its characteristics. Cannabis was nothing alien or strange to the Romans. It was already present in Greek culture, one of two main building blocks of Roman culture. Throughout the empire, it was cultivated both in form of hemp for ropes and linen, but also in form of cannabis for medication, religion and recreation. Its seeds can be found throughout Pompeii and other Italian archaeological sites, where the cultivation took place. Common people, or at least those who were present at a symposium or two, were familiar with cannabis's characteristics, such as its smell. Although there is the bias weighing the topic down within the scientific community, it can be surely assessed that Romans viewed cannabis as a medicine, but also enjoyed it sometimes during their intoxication events. There, alcohol had primacy, but was on occasion spiced up with light, serious or even deadly drugs, often more deadly than cannabis, which, maybe because of this exactly, does not get too much coverage in ancient texts on recreational intoxication. With this, I would like to remind you that our videos are made purely for recreational and educational purposes. We do not encourage anybody to try any kind of psychoactive substances, and even if they are legal or even sold as medicine within your area and you're enticed to use some, please first consult with a specialist or at least learn about any potential short and long-term consequences of use. However, if possible, do avoid intoxicants. The script of this video heavily relies on what I learned when reading Alan Salmer's book titled Cannabis in the Ancient Greek and Roman World. I cannot recommend his work enough if you're interested in diving deeper into the topic. That would be all. So remember, Roma caput mundi.